Welcome to Thar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Team Associated T6.4 Bag 2. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is install our front ball stud mount and steering assembly onto the chassis with the plus 2.5 bulkhead. So that being said, if you're going to use the stock plastic bulkhead, you want this one right here that says the plus 2.5. You're going to face this towards the front of the vehicle, and that'll give you the plus 2.5. I recommend using the aluminum one or the steel one, depending on your track conditions. I have an aluminum one that I took off another vehicle that'll work. So this was made for the previous generation vehicles. So it shows 25 degrees or 30 degrees because the kickup was 27.5. So the 30 degree is actually the plus 2.5 degrees. I just put it down with a Sharpie so I would remember. And the 25 degrees would be minus 2.5 degrees. So I'm going to face the 30 degree facing the front of the vehicle, and that'll give me the kickup that is stock for the stock setup. Additionally, I'll put a link in the description below where you can get the aluminum one, and I'll also put a link for the steel one. So for now, I'm going to try the aluminum one, but I think I would probably prefer the steel one. So I'm going to go ahead and have the local hobby shop order that so I can try that out. So we're going to need 2 M3x14 flathead screws. So definitely check the measurement of your screws that you're going to use, because there are some longer flathead screws in this step. So like I said, you're going to face the 30 degree or the plus 2.5 towards the front of the vehicle. So I have that like so. And then the ball stud mount, these two bosses here and here go into the chassis in these two holes here and here, and that kind of helps secure it into place, just like so. It kind of centers it in there. We got our bulkhead with the 30 degree or the plus 2.5 facing the front. And we're going to use our 2 M3x14 flathead screws, and they're going to screw into the rear 2 holes in the bulkhead. You're going into plastic, so you don't need to crank on it too hard. Once you feel it shoulder up, you're good. All right. So in bag 2, step 1, just so you know, there is kind of a typo or a mistake in the manual, which I'll show. Right here it says there are 2 bulkheads included in the kit, 0 and the 2.5. 0 is the standard used. The arrows on the 2.5 bulkhead should point forward for the desired setting. So yes, it's 0 is the standard used, but that's the standard used for the B6.4. The T6.4 uses the plus 2.5. So take a note of that. All right, next we're going to install the battery foam in these channels and the aluminum ESC chassis weight. So nice that they included the aluminum 11 gram chassis weight. Typically these are steel. And then these are our battery foams that we're going to install in these 2 channels. All right, so I'm just going to take some rubbing alcohol and put it on a microfiber towel. to clean off the chassis. Make sure there's no oils or any residue from the machining processes, so that when we put down our battery foams, they do not want to come off. All right, so for the 11-gram chassis weight, we're going to need 4 M2x3 flathead screws, and they recommend using some Loctite on these, and I would caution against that. This is the one screw that does go into aluminum that I've seen strip out quite often, and people needing to use, you know, a Dremel or something to get it out. But we're going to install these 4 screws in these 4 holes. So since I'm running on carpet, we're going to have chassis protectors on, so most likely these screws aren't going to back out because they have no place to back out. But if you are running on dirt without a chassis protector, it might be smart to put some blue Loctite, but I would only use high quality tools like the MIP tools to remove the screws once they're installed. If you don't have high quality tools and you try to remove these screws, you're most likely going to strip them. And a lot of the times at our local club, we don't really run these chassis weights, so I'm going to install it now for the build, and I might remove it later. So we'll see how that turns out. All right, next up, we're going to put our side rails on. So let's get that off the parts tree. Try to make sure there's no sharp edges from where we remove these parts from the parts tree. All right, got the side rails. We're gonna need 4 M3x10 flathead screws and 5 M3x8 flathead screws. So the chassis rails are gonna install like so. And the 4 M3x10 screws are gonna install in these 4 holes, and the 5 M3x8 screws are gonna attach in these 4 holes, or these 5 holes, which are gonna be these 4, and then this one here. This side is not gonna get the screw in there yet until we install the fan mount, if we decide to install a fan mount. I'm not tightening everything down completely right now. I'm just making sure I can get everything started. And then once I get everything started and I know each screw is in there, then I'll go back and tighten them down. All right, that one side's on. Let's go ahead and do the other side. All right, so we can set the chassis aside for now and prepare the sway bar. So you want to use the silver set screw. It's the 3 by 2.5 millimeter set screw in the black anti-roll bar collar. So I'm actually going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on here. It says not to do this, it's not in the manual, but I find that if you do take a hard hit, that this could shift. And as long as you're using quality tools, it shouldn't be that big of an issue. But we're going to go ahead and put the collar. I like to start the thread and then try to get this collar on, but maybe we need to just take this collar does not want to go on. All right, for some reason, this collar does not want to go on. I don't feel like the hole in the collar is large enough. So let me go see if I have a spare, and I'll be right back. All right, so I disassembled one of my other cars to access the anti-roll bar collar. And what I found was this is a 1.5 anti-roll bar. It's actually for drag racing, I believe, but it's for the same car, essentially. So this 1.5 millimeter sway bar and the black anti-roll bar collar that came in the kit, I can't even insert the 1.5 in there. That being said, you know, this might be 1.4 millimeters. You know, it barely fits the 1.3. I mean, I had to slightly bend the sway bar to get it on, so I guess I'll use it since it's on now, but kind of a poor design. I know Associated makes a larger one that if you buy the anti-roll bar hardware, you end up getting these blue ones rather than the black ones, and these fit on, you know, much easier, you know. So just thought I'd mention that. If you end up going bigger on the anti-roll bar in the front, you're gonna have to change out the collar because it won't fit the one that came stock. All right, so put a little bit of blue Loctite on here because I don't want it to back off. Try to get it centered as best as possible, and you don't want to over tighten it because you can end up bending the bar. So there we go. This will actually install. Set the rest of the hardware aside for now. This will actually install right here on the chassis, and I like to just kind of eyeball, make sure it looks pretty centered. So we can continue. So next we need our steering servo, and we need to make our steering link. So the steering link can be made from these two pieces here or some of these pieces here. They're going to be the same dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and get these off the parts tree. So let's get the link made up first. We're going to need a 1 millimeter aluminum washer as well as M3x10 set screw, which we have right here. So what I've seen is sometimes when people assemble these, they don't put this in evenly, and so it might only have a few threads and it strips out. So this is 10 millimeters long. We have a 1 millimeter spacer in between. So that gives us 9 millimeters to use on each side. So you want to put 4.5 millimeters in. So we're going to put this in, and we want to measure 5.5 millimeters being exposed. So that way we have even engagement in both steering links. All right, 5.5. So good. Go ahead and put on our spacer, and then we're going to tighten this until it's all the way snug. And we want to make sure that we get the correct orientation, because they're not going to be, facing the same direction like this. The ball cups or these ball link cups are going to be offset a little bit, something like that. Tightened. Just fully tightened. The cups are offset a little bit, and that's what we want. So set this aside for now. Now we're going to get our steering servo out. So this is a Houston RC branded servo. This servo can be used with 8.4 volts. The operating speed is 0.07 seconds at 6 degrees at 8.4 volts. And the static holding torque at 8.4 volts is 19 kilograms centimeter, or 264 ounce inches. So it is brushless. Basically, the difference between this and a ProTech servo is that this has steel gears, so instead of titanium gears, from my understanding, and this will be a little bit more robust in the long run. So, and it does come with a warranty. If it is bought at Houston RC and one of the staff members sets up the endpoints and make sure that you're not overstressing the servo, it does come with a 1-year warranty. So that's great to have. I have this in my 4-wheel drive car, so I'm pretty sure this will be perfectly fine for a stadium truck. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and center this off camera, and then I'll be right back. All right, the steering servo is centered. So now we can install our servo horn. I'd recommend getting the Associated aluminum servo horn. I'll put a link in the description below as to the part number. If I'm not mistaken, it's part number 1370. That's the clamping servo horn. Same one that you're going to use in, say, a B6.4. So let's go ahead and get this installed. So try to install it as vertical as possible in this orientation, and then once the car is built, we can adjust the sub trim to get it perfectly vertical and straight. And I like to use blue Loctite on these screws because I have seen them back out. Case in point, yesterday during our series race, one of the racers was like, hey, I might have to rebuild the front end or something if everything feels sloppy. Come to note, he looks at his steering servo and the screws backed out and it's almost ready to fall out. So definitely consider using Loctite and just periodically checking to make sure that it's not backing out. All right, so now we're going to use the 8mm long ball stud and install it in the servo horn. So, and again, since my servo horn is aluminum, I'm going to install it using some blue Loctite. Nice and snug, so there we go. Now we can move on to bag 2, step 5. So we're gonna get our servo mount ready. So we're gonna need our 2 servo mounts along with the servo brace. Now we're going to need two M3x6 button head cap screws. And so this will install in this orientation here. So on the bottom, this will be attaching to the chassis. This is the top portion. We have a threaded hole and a boss. And this boss right here, or pin, is going to install in the servo mount brace in these holes here and here. So just like this. And then we're going to install using the M3x6 button head cap screw with some blue Loctite. You don't need to tighten it down too hard because you're going to end up compressing the plastic. So once it snugs up, it'll be good. So now we're going to use the M3x6 low profile socket head cap screws to install the servo onto the servo mount. So just like so. And we will use some blue Loctite on these screws because they are going into aluminum. And I'm going to get them all started first before I start tightening them down. Now we can install our steering link. So go ahead and pop that on to the ball stud. And now we can install the servo onto the chassis. And we're going to install it with two M3x10 flathead screws. And just realize that they did not include a chassis weight for the servo. So we're not going to be installing that on this car. But I guess that is an option. I'm going to set the sway bar aside for now. The two M3x10 flathead screws are going to install in these two holes here and here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some blue Loctite on there. All right, got it started. I'm going to leave it loose and go ahead and install the other screw. The screws started at the bottom. Start tightening up the screws that hold the servo onto the mount. So everything's installed. Now we can install our steering linkage onto the ball set on the bell crank. There we go. And the link moves nice and free. I don't feel any binding. So now we can install the top plate. So let's get this off the parts tree. All right. So we're going to need to put our sway bar back on. And now we can install the top plate. We're going to need two M3x14 button head cap screws. And these two screws are going to install here and here. Now we can move on to back to step 7. We're going to need two M3x10 button head cap screws. And we're going to need two M3x5mm set screws, which were in the sway bar hardware bag. So the two M3x10 button head cap screws are going to install here and here. Alright, don't over tighten this screw because it can cause the steering bell cranks to bind up. So I like to basically tighten it down, snug it up, and then just back it off just a hair. And I'll do the same thing for this one. And looks like Associated finally caught on to the problem that the steering link would hit the top plate. So this is the B6.4 top plate, but the cutouts they have on it now look slightly different than what came on my kit and what's on the parts wall at my local hobby shop. So it looks like they did do a slight modification to that mold, so that way the steering linkage doesn't hit the top plate. Perfect. Now we can install these M3x5mm set screws in these two holes here and here. And this is just to these set screws are there to limit the play of the sway bar. Essentially, you want to tighten this screw down until the sway bar doesn't move freely like it should. Like this, it doesn't move. So now we back it off until it moves freely, just like so. So now we can do the other one. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and add the anti-roll bar pivots to the ends just to get it some more weight, so it's kind of easier to see whether or not the screws are tight enough. And we're just going to make the end of the sway bar flush with the anti-roll bar pivot. Everything moves nice and free like it should. I'll call that good. Now we can get our control arms ready to install. So let's get these off the parts tree. No sharp edges. So these arms are directional. So if you see here, there's an L, and then on this one, there's an R. So right at this point, we're gonna need these anti-roll bar links, this piece and this piece. We're gonna get them off the parts tree. So I think it'll be easier to install these with the control arms off. So just gotta pop those on. Next, we're going to be easier to turn this over. And this is our right arm. This is our left arm. We're going to need our front hinge pin brace. There's a smooth side and a rough side, like a rough edge. So we want the smooth side facing the front of the vehicle. So now we can grab our hinge pins, and so we're going to put the hinge pin in. It'll go through the front hinge pin brace, then through the bulkhead, and then through the control arm. So we're going to do the same thing for the other side. And everything moves nice and free. That's what we want. Now we're going to install an M2x4 button head cap screw. It's a small screw. We're going to install it in this small hole next to the hinge pin. And this captures the hinge pin from falling out the back of the control arm. So all you got to do is screw it in and then be very light pressure. Make sure that it just shoulders up and it overlaps the hinge pin just enough to keep it captured. So we're going to do that on both control arms. So we're in this position now. If you're using the plastic bulkhead, the kit came with two M3x3 set screws, and you'll install those in like the location is kind of centered, and that just captures the hinge pin from rotating. So I'm going to go ahead and install the 4 set screws that came with this aluminum brace, or this aluminum bulkhead, and I'll just install it with some blue Loctite. And basically all I'm doing is making sure it shoulders up and give it a little bit of pressure and call it good. So if you have the aluminum one or the steel one, definitely recommend using a bit of blue Loctite. All right, with that installed, we're going to install our front bumper. So we can get this bumper off the parts tree. Bumper goes on just like that. We're going to use 2 M3x16 flathead screws and install it in these 2 holes here and here. Turn the chassis over. Everything moves nice and free like it should. And now we can install the sway bar end links to the control arms themselves. There we go. That's pretty much back to steps 7 and 8 completed. Now we can move on to the last step of back 2, which is going to be getting the front shock tower assembled and ready to install onto the chassis. So let's set the chassis aside for a little bit, and we have our front shock tower. Notice that the front side of the shock tower has these countersunk holes and the back side does not. And the back side usually has the part number on it. So what we're going to do is get our M3x20 low profile socket head cap screws, and we're going to install them in the outermost position on the shock tower. And we're going to insert them from the front side. So we see the countersunk holes here, and then we're going to insert the screws just like so. I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to install an M3x8 washer. On each of the low profile set screws. Then we're going to install our shock bushings. And what I like to do here is put some blue Loctite like about halfway down the screw length, and then I'll go ahead and install the shock bushings. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hold back up on the shock bushing with a 7mm driver, and then tighten the screw with a 2mm. You don't want to tighten it too tight, just basically snug it up and it's good. Next, we're going to install the front body mount. which is this piece here. Looks like it needs a little bit of cleaning from the parts tree. So I'm just gonna take an X-Acto and trim these bits off. So to install this front body mount, it's going to go through these two holes here and here, just like so. And then we're going to install two M3x10 button head cap screws from the back of the shock tower. And once you feel it snug up, it's good. Don't want to over tighten it since it is going into plastic. All right, so the front shock tower is done. Now we can install it onto the chassis. We're going to use 4 M3x10 flathead screws. We're going to install them in these 4 countersunk holes here, and they will install onto the top plate in these 4 holes. So the one thing that I didn't do early on is apply these foam strips on the inside here for the battery. I feel like that's a personal preference. Whenever I see someone apply these, it's kind of hard to get the battery in and out. So I usually just leave it out, and I haven't had any issues. So that's it for bag 2 for this build. There's a lot of parts that were left over. These 2 parts here on this parts tree are for the B6.4. So I guess it'll be nice to have that spare. Looks like there's also a front wing mount that I can use on the B6.4. We got a bunch of rod ends left over. These would have been used to make the sway bar end links in the rear. So it'd be nice to have those as spares as well. So that's it for bag 2. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Let me know down in the comments below if you had any issues. I'll do my best to help you out if I can. Stay tuned for the next video, which will be bag 3. It looks like we're going to be working on the front axles. So it'll be the caster blocks, steering blocks, and getting those installed onto the control arms. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.